Fraserburgh, a town at the extreme northeastern corner of the cold shoulder of Scotland, a site known to the Romans, invaded by the Vikings, inhabited by the Picts, industrialised by the Scots, and now occupied by the Brochers. The best way to tell its story is to start at the very beginning. The very earliest inhabitants of the Fraserburgh area were a nomadic race who, as the Ice Age receded, had followed the reindeer north into Scotland. They were known as the reindeer folk, a race of hunters, wanderers, people with very little culture, but with a determination to survive. As time passed, the reindeer folk were either exterminated or absorbed by a more advanced people from the south. A more settled race, they domesticated animals, the horse, the ox, sheep, goat and pig. They moulded vessels in clay and polished stone. The most distinctive feature of this new race is the manner in which they buried their dead, within vault-like chambers over which they raised great cairns, and several of these exist within the Fraserburgh area. This was the civilization of the Stone Age. Around 2000 BC, there appeared a new race, believed to come from the Rhineland and the Netherlands, known as the short-cist folk, or more commonly known, the Beaker people, burying their dead with a small beaker, a food or drinking vessel, to provide for their journey to the next world. A fine example of such a vessel was discovered at Black Hills in Tiree, but all over this northeast corner implements have been discovered: flint, arrowheads, knives, scrapers, stone axes and hammers. Jumping ahead, customs began to change. Cremation superseded burial, and bronze took the place of stone, and in turn was succeeded by iron. But perhaps the most fascinating reminders of the Bronze Age are the stone circles, and there are several of these within the boundaries of the Broch. At Stricken House, at Logie near Lonmai, and even south at Sanhaven, there are remains of several stone circles. A familiar sight throughout Aberdeenshire is the Scrattenstein, a granite monolith standing in a field and used by the livestock for scratching. Frequently these stones are remains of stone circles, or at least serve as an outlier guiding you toward one. The circles today, very much still a mystery. Many people spending their lives researching, writing books, often contradicting someone else's book, but still, we can only advise what we think these stones may have been used for. Burial sites, places of worship perhaps, or even for sacrificial uses. Then came the Picts, a culture of people well spread across the northeast, given their name by the Romans. The Picti, the painted people, a people who left their history behind in the shape of carvings upon some of these standing stones. Pictish symbols with rods and animals at first, then influenced by the arrival of Christianity. These carvings changed into the depictions of the Celtic cross with beautifully rendered knotwork. Fraserburgh perhaps unfortunate in only ever having one recorded sculptured stone, the Tiree stone, although there may have been others, and indeed many may still be hidden away. The stone, known as the Ravenstone, bears Pictish symbols, an eagle facing left and a notched rectangle Z-rod. It now stands within the porch of the Tiree Parish Church. These symbol stones are a link between paganism and the early Christian missionaries who laboured in the area. The first of these was St. Drosten, who with his disciple St. Medin spread the gospel in the Fraserburgh area. an area once known as the Thanage of Buchan, a territory consisting of everything between the River Don and the Devon. The Thanage was ruled by the Celtic Thanes, Mormaers or chieftains. The first of these noted was Bede the Pict. The titles were passed throughout time until landing quite solidly within the Comine faction as the Earls of Buchan, at least until one Robert the Bruce came on the scene and cemented Scotland's independence and gained the Scottish crown. At Barra, in Old Meldrum, the Earl of Buchan's forces were completely routed, and thereafter followed the terrible harrying o' Buchan, which brought fire and sword to the Comine's land in the northeast of Scotland. It brought many changes to the Buchan district, for Bruce took the opportunity of making large gifts of the Comine's lands to those who had helped him gain the crown. The surrounding lands of Fraserburgh appear to have been largely divided between two great families, the Frasers and the Forbeses. The Frasers obtaining a footing in 1375 and the Forbeses in 1423. The Frasers, or Freisels, were of Norman descent and gravitated to Scotland in the latter part of the 11th century. By the 14th century, the Frasers were firmly established, and during the reign of Robert the Bruce, Sir Alexander Fraser held the position of Lord Chamberlain of Scotland. He married Lady Mary Bruce, one of the King's sisters. Sir Alexander was succeeded by his daughter Margaret, who married into the Keith family of Dunnottar Castle fame. The representation of the Fraser line passed on to Alexander's second son William, who bore a son, Alexander Fraser, whom was granted the barony of Philorth upon his father's death, and was therefore the first Fraser laird of Philorth, way back in 1375. Each succeeding laird, as enlightened men, endeavoured to improve the land and the status of the people. It was a slow and gradual process, but with the advent of Alexander Fraser, 8th Laird of Philorth, came the culmination of 2 centuries of labour. He had his sights upon the small fishing village of Faithlie, the foundations upon which he could build a great town, one grand enough to warrant the name of Fraser. Fraser's town, Fraserburgh. Of Faithlie itself, very little is known. A small fishing village, sheltered by Kinnaird Head, without a harbour of any note. The men would have to drag their boats upon the shore. It would have been an isolated, wild place, though perfectly positioned for a life living off the sea. The fertile waters of the northeast coast could well sustain the population. Alexander Fraser practically rebuilt the old village of Faithlie, and in 1576 commenced to build the harbour, laying the first stone himself. A great undertaking at that date. The harbour was bounded by a north breakwater, where the north pier is today, and a south pier, which forms the landward leg of the middle jetty. Eventually, the Laird of Philorth submitted an appeal to King James, requesting that Faithlie be elevated to the status of a burgh, and in 1588 this was done. Thus the old village of Faithlie became the Broch, Broch being the old Scots word for burgh. It will be remembered that the year 1588 was the year of the Spanish Armada, a time when all Scottish ports were fortified against possible invasion. Doubtless that the port of Faithlie was included, though it has its own stories to tell, true enough. Well, if you enjoyed that, make sure you like and subscribe and you're following us on Facebook, because there's plenty more to come.